middle class is most of us. Most Americans identify themselves as being middle class. Numbers aren't so important. What matters to people are whether or not they have a job that will support themselves and their family, whether they'll have adequate health care, whether they own a home or at least don't spend more than a third of their income on housing, have enough money that they can look forward to old age when they can't work and they will be able to take care of themselves. Those are the things that are important to people.
And the problem is, and the reason we need a lifeboat, is that the middle class is shrinking and the middle class is feeling a great deal of pressure. A lot of people are kind of holding on to the middle class, and the rest of the people are just hoping that they too won't soon be holding on, because we're seeing a real sea change in the whole economy.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. My guests today are Paul and Sarah Edwards, author of a new book called Middle Class Lifeboat. What do you mean by middle class lifeboat, and what else is there in that title?
Well, middle class is most of us. Most Americans identify themselves as being middle class. Numbers aren't so important. What matters to people are whether or not they have a job that will support themselves and their family, whether they'll have adequate health care, whether they own a home or at least don't spend more than a third of their income on housing, have enough money that they can look forward to old age when they can't work and they will be able to take care of themselves. Those are the things that are important to people.
And the problem is, and the reason we need a lifeboat, is that the middle class is shrinking and the middle class is feeling a great deal of pressure. A lot of people are kind of holding on to the middle class, and the rest of the people are just hoping that they too won't soon be holding on, because we're seeing a real sea change in the whole economy.
That is for sure. You wrote, this came out in early '08.
Yes, in January of '08.
And so, but things have changed incredibly even since then. What are you seeing?
Incredible.
Well, one of the most interesting things was that when we wrote the book, this was all a kind of a new thing to be introducing, that the sea change was coming with globalization, with peak oil, with resource depletion, and that all kinds of changes would be happening, and that we needed to start thinking about our lifestyle and our careers and how can we prepare for that. And we truly thought that there'd be 4 or 5 years that people could start shifting. Well, by the time and we also thought, well, this will be new, it'll be like, wow, different. But when it came out, it's like, it's in the news now, it's everywhere. People are already starting to experience it, and it's happened so much faster than we ever imagined. So we really have to move quickly.
In January, we did a number of radio interviews about the book, and we described it as a plan B that people needed to take into consideration. Today we'd call it the Middle Class Survival Handbook.
Yeah, really, because your subtitle is Careers and Life Choices for Navigating a Changing Economy.
And it might be now titled For Staying Afloat in a Downward Economy.
Which is what we are looking forward to for the foreseeable future in every
well,
every
it's
angle.
Only downward in the sense that it's just not going to be like we expect it to be. We've had this idea of progress. Everything's going to get better and better and better. We'll make more and more money. We'll all have more and more things. Yes. So that's part of what the new economy is going to be different. So we're going to need to live differently, and we'll need to support ourselves differently.
So how does somebody start? What do they do? What do we need to think about differently?
Well, first of all, it's an awareness of what is happening. That it isn't just, as sometimes you hear, well, the market's down and it'll go back up. That there's some fundamental changes that are happening. One of them is the fact that there are other middle-class people and populations developing all over the world who are sharing the resources that up to this point, up until, about the 1995, 1996, were pretty much Western Europe and the United States, and especially the United States, we're now sharing that. There are more middle-class people in India than there are Americans.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So and they're not done yet, So
that's right.
I think
nor China.
The first thing is to really start taking note and be aware that it's not going to just go back to normal. It's not business as usual soon. We're really changing fundamentally. The way we changed, when we went from agrarian to industrial and then industrial to information, well, this is a whole new, it's from everything we've known before to something that is more sustainable for a global world. And so the second thing we have to do is to start thinking about, well, how are we going to support ourselves in that kind of world?
Absolutely.
And third, then, what are our lifestyles going to look like? How are we going to get from this lifestyle that we live now? For many of us, it's quite complex and it's quite expensive. Well, it probably won't be that way anymore. And so how do we shift from where we are now to there? And how do we make that a transition without it being painful?
And one of the ways to do that is to demonetize what you can, your personal economy, to the extent that you can engage in, and we deal with about 10 different techniques in the book, barter, hour boards, community endeavors. There are a whole variety of different tools that you can actually get what you need to a very large extent that aren't dependent upon the size of your paycheck.
So of the money. So you're talking about exchanging, bartering, and other ways of trading services and goods without dollars.
We don't need as much, and we don't need to have more and more and more money. And that is a big mental shift to start thinking that way.
It reminded me of our learning that in Zimbabwe, which has terrible inflation, there was plenty of food. And there were people needing food. The problem was there wasn't enough money. And it was like...
For them to buy the food.
For them to buy the food.
Yeah.
So it's like, to go direct seems to make a lot of sense.
And that's happening already in various ways. CSAs, which stands for Community Supported Agriculture, are mechanisms by which farmers deal directly with people.
Yes.
And, does the farmer always need to receive cash? Well, maybe if you happen to be a lawyer and you can offer legal services and the farmer needs it, then you can barter.
Or your hands to go help do the growing, the weeding, or the
And
at our CSA, people are interning.
And there's so much more we can do ourselves. I mean, I think that's another part of demonetizing. We've sort of gotten this idea that there's an expert for everything, and we need someone to tell us how to raise our kids, we need someone to take care of our pets, we need someone to do our cooking, we have personal chefs, all of these different things. Well, many of these things we can reclaim, and will actually make our lives simpler, and we'll be more engaged in our lives when we are doing them ourselves, rather than working ourselves to death, so that we can pay other people to do all of these things that we can do ourselves.
It's almost like if you're paying money for somebody else to do it, there's got to be extra in there because you're exhausted.
Yeah.
And the wheel never stops.
The wheel never stops.
More and more and more.
We've been on a sort of a rat race, and so this will be a chance to get off, but it'll also be a pretty big adjustment.
To a much more simple way of life.
Much more.
Yes.
Well, it depends. There are things that can be done, I think, on a relatively rapid basis to improve our energy situation. There are new technologies, for example, tabletop manufacturing, where on the top of a table is a machine. Actually, you can actually build one yourself today for $2,400. The plans for them are available on the web. Tabletop manufacturing is going to change where a lot of things are made that can be made in somebody's bedroom instead of being brought over from China or wherever.
Yeah, so focusing more local is going to be another part of what we need to be adjusting to, because it's going to be costing more and more and more to ship in everything that we do and to bring people in to travel out and so forth. So the more that we can turn into our own communities and figure out how can we live here and sustain ourselves, and of course there'll be interaction across the boundary, so to speak, but we really need to focus more locally for our careers and the way we live.
Our fundamental needs.
Right.
Our food. Well, of course, I'm already hearing word of manufacturers starting to bring their plants back from overseas back to here, and it would be nice someday when they make shoes in America again.
Yeah.
Right. A major part of your book covers what kinds of vocations or careers or jobs one could think about, particularly, I would add, for the entrepreneur, for the person that's, kind of their own starter. So can you give us a flavor for, you have a section on some good jobs that are going to be needed probably no matter what the economy is, some virtual jobs off the internet, and then some jobs for the new economy. And I want to hear a little bit about all of those.
Oh.
I want to say just first, one of the reasons it's so important for us to do that kind of searching about our careers is because we don't know for sure what kind of jobs will be available. And so the ones that we have featured all are something that you can do on your own, an independent source of income, as well as jobs. So we wanted that to be a criteria, and there's several different areas that we can do that in.
Well, things involving energy are good, and that includes everything from installing alternative energy systems like solar or geothermal, consulting on that. There are now building performance analysts. I mean, there are new occupations that most people haven't heard of, but which are needed as we do things to conserve energy. There are occupations and jobs and careers that relate to the communities. As we live more locally, we're going to need much more community management. Someone can actually become certified as a community manager for less than $1,000 from the organization, the national organization that
And what do they
certifies
do?
those
What does
things.
the community manager do?
Well, you know them most familiarly as homeowner associations, but they also might manage an elderly community organization. It might be someone who puts on events. It might be someone
local vendors,
who is the manager of a co-housing venture. These are people who have developed the qualifications to actually enable us to live more locally.
And to run our own communities, because there'll be a lot of that. We'll need to be joining together with other people.
Yes.
And supporting
yes,
each other.
Yes, yes. I noticed that when you think about the new economies, you know, that are leaner, it's like a lot of the fluff is not going to be here, but taking care of each other, a lot of that service, and particularly as people are getting older, our population is getting older.
Right.
Well, there are a lot of needs that the elder population has, and some of those things are things that people will still have the money to pay for, you know, caregiving of various kinds. One of the lessons that we can learn is to look at and see what happened when Russia's economy got into so much difficulty about 15 years ago. And the kinds of things that people were doing were relating to hauling. Someone who has a truck is in a great position to actually do a variety of things for other people, including, you know, as energy becomes more efficient, to develop a community shopping list, and they get paid for doing that.
Just to be the shopper for everybody. I can picture
everybody,
that.
yeah.
Yes.
Guard dogs. So pets aren't out, it turns out. Need to be trained. They need to be raised. And all that kind of thing.
Restoration, reclamation.
Okay, all those kinds of things which enable us to get more life out of the things that we've had.
Yes.
Not so much a throwaway world.
Yes.
Yeah.
And crafts. Many of the things that we think of as hobby careers won't be hobbies anymore. You know, things like cooking and sewing and doing things for other people, canning, doing things for other people that perhaps if you're older or you don't know how, there's a lot of reasons that people would want someone gardening.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
was going
that's
to
a big
say.
one, you know, growing food.
There-
Lots of people don't know how to do that.
And people who can provide that service to come in and plant your garden for you
Right.
and kind of keep an eye on it every week. I mean, that's already starting to happen.
That's already starting to happen. People are making good livings by doing that. They're not only consulting, but they're actually doing the work for people. But again, if they're also teaching people how to do it for themselves, they're preparing them for things that they might need.
So you want to be thinking about what can you do locally that is needed. You want to be thinking about what isn't involving discretionary income, because as Paul said, a lot of the fluffy things will go away. But what are the basic things that people need?
Well, certainly your repair people,
Yeah,
fix-it people. Yeah, I mean, fundamental needs
Construction,
here.
yeah.
That's right.
Focusing on that kind of thing, and also things that can't and won't be done and replaced by technology. And that's get again to the hands-on kind of daily life.
The people services
Yeah.
and so on. Yes.
And it can be teaching, tutoring, and particularly in things like lost skills. Now that's something you might more readily barter than getting people to pay you for it, but you can live quite well on barter.
Yes. And even though you're supposed to pay taxes for it, you may or may not.
Well,
and there are
actually,
ways to get
yeah.
around it. There's these hours programs that a community can set up where you're trading time with each other, and there are no tax consequences for that because everything is there's no value set on anything. If you're a lawyer and you spend an hour helping someone, that's fine. If you're a bricklayer and you're helping them for an hour, it's the same. If you come and sit with someone's child for an hour, it's all the same. And you contribute something, and then you can use the services
And
of
that's
others.
the key, is that first you give, and
then
then
you
you
can
get.
I liked that. I
participate,
liked
yeah.
that notion, because you've got to give first, or
Right.
so you're
Right.
not just
Right.
taking
Right.
from the system. One of the sections of your book has to do with people who are surviving or thriving by changing the way they live,
Yeah.
not just their vocation.
Yes, because even if you have a good vocation, if you don't have the time to enjoy it, if your life is so expensive, so unsustainable in the sense that you have to work morning, noon, and night just to stay afloat, then that's not really a life. So what we did, we actually just interviewed hundreds of people for this book, both for the careers, the 51 careers, and also for these 9 different lifestyles that we found. We interviewed what are people doing, and about 50 to 65% of people in the United States are already simplifying. They're already taking a look at their life they are living now and thinking, well, how could I, change it a little bit to spend less, to get out of debt, to just live a little less complexly and simply as I have it now. But a lot of people are doing some going outside of that and going, well, what else could I do? For example, we interviewed, and we have a whole chapter for people who've decided that they wanted to live in another country because there are opportunities economically to moving to certain places such as Panama, Puerto Rico, not Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, and we went into, we explored these different countries, and they are always changing. You have to do a lot of research if you're going to do that, but that was very interesting. Other people have decided to take their life on the road or on the sea, and people are living out of their boat docks, and not because of feeling like, oh, I can't do anything else, but because this would be a more interesting lifestyle that I could live, I could enjoy my life more, and I wouldn't have to just constantly be working at something that I didn't really want to do in the first place. Getting off the grid, lots of people doing that, people relocating to some place that's more sustainable and that's not as expensive. So searching different parts of the community, we have tons of, there's lots of information on, like what if you want to live in a walkable community or you want to live in a college-based community, and people are really taking a look at where do I want to live that's going to support me.
Where we're conducting this interview is in a co-housing development.
That's right.
Yes.
That's
And we'll
right.
see more of that.
People living together in all different kinds
Which
of ways.
has all kinds of economies,
Yeah.
both of land and shared tools and
Share
all
the
kinds
work,
of,
All kinds
and you
of
have your
things.
social network right there. and
People,
yes.
families moving in together.
And so it's not necessarily, it's living differently. It's not necessarily not living as well,
Right.
particularly if you can reduce the amount of stress and the amount of tension in your life.
Well, that's living better, it would seem to me, that if we
Yeah.
can live with less stress. Certainly the whole force of our advertising is all about all the separated little houses with all the goods, and that we're trying to keep up with, and we're losing our social networks, and time and
Right.
beauty and so on.
And that's why
So I think we
community
have-
management is going to be important, Janaya, because we need to relearn what it is that makes communities
To be in a
how to
community,
how to
yeah.
bind them together to create the networks of people that will lead to more cooperation and collaboration.
which is going to, I think, we'll learn some new people skills that we haven't had to have in
We
some
will,
ways.
yeah. I think we will, and that'll be good. I think that people feel a lot of isolation in their lives, and we become somewhat insular into just the people that we work with. We see them at work, maybe at our church or in our next door neighbor, but people are so busy working that there's just a lot of disconnection. So there's upsides and challenging sides to the changes that are coming, and I think that's the exciting thing about it. It's not like this, oh my gosh, it's all doom and gloom. It's like, well, yeah, this is going to be a big change, but how could I take the opportunity of this change to restructure my life in a way that's more interesting to me, in a way that's more sustainable of my own energy and my own time?
So what was some of the most intriguing parts as you're researching lifestyles? I was just fascinated to read your section on the variety of lifestyles. I never thought of living on a boat.
I know,
It's like,
I hadn't either.
whoa! And I think that the people living on the road, we will see that that's certainly going to change as the gasoline and oil
in fact,
changes.
that's less feasible than it is today. probably in many cases can think of RVs as being forms of lower cost housing.
Yes.
Well, and one
yes.
of the
I think
things
there are a
that
lot
they
of
were
houses on the wheels that are going to
Yeah.
become houses on houses.
Houses on
Well,
houses.
and one of the
yeah.
things that they were doing even then is that they were planting themselves somewhere for periods of time. It was much more effective. I'm not just to be living on the road 365 days, but going to one place and perhaps doing caretaking, which is another thing that we
Yeah, that's
feature, which is taking care of other people's property. You know, there are millions of homes in the United States that are uninhabited. And they need, oftentimes they need people to live in them, to take care of them. There's ranches, there's you know, apartments in New York City, and so forth. So that's a really interesting thing. So people who are living on the road can actually just sort of move from one kind of caretaking position to another, and it's a interesting life. And those who do it really enjoy it. Another thing that's quite interesting was the urban Thoreaus, people that are really bringing
Urban
Thoreaus.
as in Henry David Thoreau.
Yes.
All right.
People
What is-
who are bringing the country back into their city property, and you know, gardening, raising food. We know people who are producing pounds and pounds of food on their regular city lots, as long as it's legal to do, and which is another issue we have to talk about. Is that sometimes our local zoning and our homeowners association things are going to need to change for people to do the things that they need to do to really live a good life. But they're bringing that back. We interviewed someone up in Oakland who has goats, who has quail, chickens, geese, and grows almost all of his food, their food,
Wow.
right there. And it's just a city lot. I mean, a regular housing lot.
That's fabulous. That's exciting. I
Yeah.
mean, what you hear is probably not unlike the Victory Gardens in World War II. It's like, well, we have to tighten our belts a bit, but then there's creative possibilities that could be wonderful here.
Yeah.
Yes, there are, and that's what we've seen people do. And there's enough models out there of people either growing their own food or creating their own energy system by becoming more energy independent. That are lessons for all of us to say, hey, will that work for me?
So in our last 5 or 6 minutes here, what would you write differently? What would you say differently? And how would you advise people to head out and do this?
I would say that we really need to pay a lot more attention to it. We need to really take it seriously, and we need to not fall into the thing of like, well, this is just a cycle, or this is, you know, everything will be okay. I'll just go back to the way I've been doing things, and it'll work out. We really need to wake up to the fact that this is a big change, and the sooner that we start taking a look at how do we want to change, the sooner we will be able to shape that as opposed to be a victim of it. That's what we really want to get across to people is don't become a victim of this kind of change. You know, become a participant in the way it's going to unfold.
Another thing I think we would have written about more are what the policies are that are needing to be addressed. There's a role for government to play in this. While it's up to us to become self-sufficient, and we need to make those changes that we need to make in terms of our career, our lifestyle. Nevertheless, there's a role for policy, and that has to do with funding research and development. Did you know that the actual investment by the federal government has declined over the last 6 or 7 years? And at no time in our history have we needed to have new technology,
Yes.
New ways of doing things. For example, one of the most promising technologies that some people believe is hydrogen. And there's a process that's being researched at the University of New Mexico to separate coal into hydrogen and water. And you know how much that grant is? $843,000.
It's
We're
peanuts.
underfunding.
Nothing.
We're underfunding what we need to do. Our kids aren't getting the education that they need. Those are the kinds of things the government can do, and we need to insist that the government do that.
You know, so like we can't wait for government to take care of it all. We really need to get busy with our own thing. At the same time, we really need to start demanding of our governments, that would be the local, the state, and the national, through the people that we elect and through the policies and initiatives that we support, that they are first aware, and secondly, that they're removing some of the things that prevent us from doing what we need to do and creating new policies that enable us to make it easier to be doing what we need to be doing.
Seems to me that we're talking about sea change.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
part of it is to burst the bubble that we all think of like, oh, well, it's just a down cycle or just a recession or whatever, and not seeing that peak oil I mean, there really is more demand than supply, and it's not coming, we're not going to be able to replenish it as
There
we
isn't
have
any
in the
more
past.
coming.
and it's
not
not
gonna go
just
back.
it's just not oil, and it's not just resources. It's other sourcing. It's the fact that robots and machines are able to do things that people used to do and get employed to do.
Well, and it's a shift too.
We're seeing it in our everyday lives. How often do you get a live operator when you make a telephone call,
right.
or you go to the supermarket, and now the emphasis is on the check out yourself
Yes.
stands.
Yes.
And there's a shift in responsibility too, because as we're competing more with other countries, and revenue goes down for our government as well as for the corporations and so forth that we're working with, it just becomes a situation of, wow, everybody's feeling that push, and so it ends up coming back to us to take over a lot of the responsibilities for health care, for educational costs, for retirement packages. So a lot of the things that we've relied on is just sort of being there for us are dwindling more and more.
Well, certainly this credit crunch is going to
It's
raise
showing
into
that.
question. It's like, and the government continuing to issue more money, or the Fed issuing more money, which inflates everything. We're not going to be, we cannot inflate our way out of this forever and ever and ever.
No.
No, we can't.
So I think that for people who say, I'm not going to be able to, don't count on the Social Security, it may or may not be there. We have to build that here among ourselves while we press for those policy changes we should be having all kinds of, a really coherent energy policy, for example.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes. And health. Health is a big issue for
Yes.
people.
Yes.
For example, I did a study for the bankruptcy court back in the late 60s, because they were concerned then about the rise of consumer debt.
Wow.
And 1 out of 50 people took bankruptcy, because I actually interviewed the people, because of health expenses. Today, someone else did a study nationally, and it's better than 1 out of every 2 people are taking bankruptcy because of healthcare costs. We've got to bring those under control. And the forecasts are that they're going to continue to rise, and that means a systemic change.
There's a lot of changes ahead for us,
There
isn't
are.
it?
Yes.
And actually, they're happening faster than we expected.
Much
quicker
faster.
than we
The housing crunch, the energy crunch, the other sourcing, the technology, the rise of the middle classes, other places. And there are things that we can do, and those are the kinds of things that involve our careers, our lifestyles, and how we get the things that we need in our life.
Paul, Sarah, wow. Thank you for giving us a notion of the need for the lifeboat and something to hold on to, some ground to hold on to in what you've given us in this book. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
this.
Thank you.
You're watching Peak Moment, Community Responses for a Changing Energy Future. I'm Janaea Donaldson, and my guests are Paul and Sarah Edwards. If you value these programs, please contribute. You can go to our website, peakmoment.tv, to contribute and also to sign up for our email newsletter. Join us next time